But in this top 40 list, we've got a tie at 34 between, what is old is new again. Omarion Cooper, late addition in the transfer portal for Florida State, back from Colorado. We have photo evidence of him in Nole gear because that's from a practice from yesteryear. But Omarion Cooper is tied for 34th with Blake Nicholson, a linebacker who was gaining a lot of praise from Adam Fuller towards the end of spring camp. More than just a coverage player. That's what Adam Fuller was talking about. He was getting a little bit more physical. Keandre Jones, interior offensive lineman, second year in the program after transferring in from Auburn at number 33. Number 32 is wide receiver Jaylen Brown, who I am fascinated by. This is somebody I didn't get to see a whole lot of in spring camp the times I was down there, but I hear he makes some waves from time to time. And then number 31 is Mastro. One final year in the Garnet and Gold for the Aussie punter, Alex Mastromano. That is the list, 31 to 34 tied, so 31 to 35 technically. Ira, what is most intriguing to you in that list? Is there a player that maybe you think should be rated higher? Is there a surprise, maybe where a guy is? I'll give you the floor. What do you think about that list and those 5 names?
So, and Blake was on there, right?
Yes.
Blake. I have a feeling Blake Nicholson we may look back and think Blake Nicholson should have been a lot higher. We'll see. I mean, that was linebacker's a tough position because, we just don't know how it's going to shake out. You don't think they're going to play 5 linebackers. You think they're probably going to play 3 to 4. And so we don't really know for sure. Obviously you've got DJ Lundy. They brought in Cam Riley from Auburn, who is a really nice player. He's played a lot of college football. So does he win the starting job? Is it Blake? Is it Omar Graham Jr.? Is it Cryer? So we really, Sean Murphy from Alabama. So there's a lot of guys in that mix. I have a feeling Blake may emerge as if not the number 2, then the number 3. And if he does, I think you'd want him higher. I mean, we know he can run like the wind. He's a tremendous athlete. Some of the things they said in the spring, the way Adam Fuller got so excited after that one scrimmage when he talked about how when he was up in the box and he ran into Randy Shannon on the field, and Randy Shannon said, wait till you watch the film and look at Blake, because Adam Fuller's watching the whole defense and he's calling plays and everything else. Randy Shannon was just watching his guys, and he's like, you're going to like what you saw. And then when Adam Fuller went and watched the film, he's like, oh yeah, you're right. And so this is one where, and then just talking to other people around the program, this is one where I'm not saying it based on what we saw, because honestly, and you can speak to this also, it's because they don't really play full contact running football. It's hard to know exactly with the linebackers, but they sound like they were very, very impressed by him. So he's a guy that Jaylen Brown, I think, is going to be a big weapon, but I would point to Blake. I think there's a chance Blake may be a much bigger impact than we think.
Yeah, you're right. It's very hard to determine anything other than maybe pass pro drills or pursuit drills because you don't go to the ground. You don't tackle to the ground in practice. But you're right. Adam Fuller was really impressed with the scrimmage performance. Randy Shannon was. But then also a run game drill in a sequential practice. And he's like, well, I saw him in the run game the other day, and
right,
he's more than a guy who can cover. But just to give folks an idea about how difficult this year's list is to rank, 2 staff members, only 2 have Blake Nicholson on their list. Ira, not me, Jeff, but you guys both have him in your top 20. You have them both in your top 20 because you're projecting that he's going to be heavily in the rotation. And I don't think you're necessarily wrong about that. I put Cam Riley in there sight unseen pretty high because I think that his track record suggests a little bit more than maybe fellow SEC transfer Sean Murphy. Like he could come in and play right away. And I don't know how the numbers are going to shuffle, but you could totally be right about Blake Nicholson. I think Ira, at the very least, they like him on third down if they're going to put a couple linebackers out there because his coverage skills are advanced. But if he does anything more, then it's going to be hard to keep him off the field on first and second down.
And then Duke Cooper's another one, man, that could be way undervalued. And the fact that I'm glad he announced he was transferring before we did the top 40 and not after. But if you go back to early in his career when he played at a pretty high level at corner. Then he got injured, didn't have a good season. Then he goes to Colorado. But he started everywhere. He started when he was here. He started out there. And they had some good corners, man. They had some highly touted corners at Colorado. And Omarion Cooper was the guy. And then coming in back to Florida State, I felt like at the time, Cooper never really came out and said this, but it felt like we all assumed they made the move for him to safety in that spring. showed some promise, and then he bails. A lot of people felt like, well, maybe he just does not want to make that move. But for him to come back with the corners they have in Fentrell Cypress and Azaria Thomas and then all the really good young corners they've got, he's got to be open to playing some safety, at least rotating there. And if he wins a job at safety or is in that mix, he could definitely be much higher.
That's the math I did where I put him on my list. There are 3 staff members that have Amarian Cooper out of 7. We got 7 panelists, but only 3 have Amarian Cooper on the list. That's Ira, Aslan, and myself. And we all have Amarian in the top 30. I don't think you come here not to play, at least being heavily in the rotation. And I don't think you come here, Ira, if you're not okay with it's the same defensive coaching staff, that told you you're going to be moving to safety. You got to be cool with that. And maybe there's some reps at slot corner behind Earl Little. I don't know. They're impressed with what Earl is capable of. I know he was in a non-contact jersey a lot of the spring, but I think he's here to play safety, Ira. And that's, again, part of the math I did with Conrad Hussey, because I think Devontae Brown was brought in to be an insurance policy. So if you're telling me State Farm agent Russ Voorhis, this is a nice little play, but there are 2 insurance policies that are veterans that are there to help usher along the kids in what I believe to be the safety rotation, along with Shaheem Brown, who's going to be out there a ton.
No, you're right.
They know they know exactly what they're getting in Amarian Cooper, and it works both ways. He has to be humble enough to come back to Florida State, but they got to want him, and they know exactly where they need help. So I don't think he's coming here to ride the pine, is in short.
Yeah, and I got the sense from talking to a couple of people around the program, not coaches, but just people around the program that raised their eyes a bit about Amarian coming back, just because, man, he wasn't here all spring. He wasn't here for tour of duty. He wasn't here for the last, he left the program on his own, and now he's coming back. There's some people who are like, do you need to bring him back? But I think the coaching staff, to your point, they felt like he can help this football team. He didn't leave on bad terms. He was never a bad guy. And, I think he's always been somebody that, they knew could play, but maybe they want him in a different position. So, yeah, man, it could end up being a really valuable addition. And I like the Devontae Brown pickup too. We're not talking about him necessarily, but I agree with you. They go hand in hand. If you got guys that have played 30, 40, 50 college football games, that's a big deal.
It also tells me that they want to win more now.
Right.
When we were back in December, you didn't know. Is this going to be a year where maybe you just let some of the kids learn from experience, which means fail in some situations in order to grow? A move like this and a move like some of the ones that they've made this offseason in the transfer portal suggests they want to reload on the fly. Jaylen Brown comes in at number 32. He's an interesting player to me. 6 panelists put Jaylen Brown on their list, as low as 37, as high as 26. There's only one that did not have him on their list, and that's me, because it's ignorance. Now, I did not see a whole lot from Jaylen Brown when I was down watching the practices that I saw. It was more trench work, and then the day that I watched a little bit more of the 7-on-7s and the 11-on-11s, there wasn't a whole lot from Jaylen Brown. Saw flashes in the spring showcase of the speed that they have, that with Jalen Lucas followed by Jaylen Brown. They called a couple of jet actions to Jalen. He can fly. What did you see from him? And do you think that he's appropriately placed? That's almost like a sleeper position at 32 for wide receiver.
Yeah, it's almost like this is a totally reference that people might not get, but I'll try to explain it. But I grew up at the horse track, as you know, Tom, and my dad would call it a saver bet. Like you're not totally sold on maybe the favorite, the second favorite, or third favorite, but that's where you put your most money. But you put a saver on this long shot that you think, because he might hit it and it's going to have a big return if he does. And so I think, to me, that's what Jaylen Brown is, because I think he could be a guy that is a year away. It's possible. Or he could be a guy that really comes through with some huge plays this season. And I don't think he's going to be a guy that catches 35, 40 passes, but I think there's a decent chance he's a guy who catches 25 passes for 6 touchdowns and hits some big plays. Because, there probably was not a practice this spring where he was available where he didn't get behind the secondary. Now, maybe the quarterback didn't hit him. Maybe he, just the timing was off. A lot of times they did connect. But, man, he has got elite speed. He's really smooth as a route runner. I like him a lot. I really think he's going to be – I think he's going to be a huge player for Florida State at some point. It could be this season. But to your point – we didn't see enough in the spring to say, oh, yeah, definitely. There's no doubt. Like Jalen Lucas has the elite speed that we like and the quickness, and he's ready to play. Like he's played 3 years of college football. he's coming in here. He's ready to play, game ready from the first Saturday in Dublin. He'll be ready to play. Jaylen Brown, I think, has got a huge upside. I just don't know how quickly he's going to be like a down-to-down player. But I think I'll be surprised if DJ doesn't hit him for some long balls this season.
Yeah, he's got the right quarterback to use his skill set to the fullest. Some years you see a guy who can blaze, and the quarterback is Chad Pennington. Right. You're like, man, those do not match up very neatly. But in this case, it matches up quite well. So we'll see what Jaylen Brown does. To Alex Mastromano, I know we didn't talk about Keandre as much. That's going to be determined, I think, on the offensive line for the 8-man rotation. Right. Keandre certainly capable. He was a rotational guard last year with Dimitri Emmanuel for a lot of the season on the right side. But we'll see what Keandre brings to the table. To Mastromano, Ira, I looked last year. He had 66 punts in total in the 14 games that Florida State played. I'm going to remove the last 2 for obvious reasons, where the offense wasn't anything really. It was mostly about field position. He had 15 punts in those 2 games, just to give you an idea. So a 12-game total last year, 51 times Alex Mastromano booted the ball away. Are you taking more punts? Is he busier or less busy this season than he was last year for only the 12-game slate?
I bet he's probably a little busier. I think this offense is going to be a little more feast or famine. I mean, I think there's going to be some impressive drives, and then I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple of drives here or there that go sideways, and you need to call him Mastromano. So I don't think they're going to be quite as efficient, but I think they're going to be more explosive. So I would say he punts a little bit more. And, man, what a great gift he is. I remember after that Orange Bowl, there wasn't a lot of good things to be happy about in that Orange Bowl, but we were allowed to go into the locker room. I assumed he was gone. Like I think he walked on senior day. And he's an older guy. He did not come to Florida State at 17. He's from Australia, had played club, rugby or whatever. He had been, he had kind of lived before he came to Florida State. I did not expect him to come back for a 5th season. And so but they let us interview players in the locker room after that game, which was a lot of fun, as you can imagine, going into that locker room after that game against Georgia. But the best thing that came out of that whole thing was when I talked to Alex Mastromano, and I was like, "Hey man, you know what you're doing next year?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm coming back. I want to go to grad school." And I was like, "Dude, that's the greatest thing I've heard." I mean, and I think having him back and Ryan back as your punter and kicker. I mean, it's just huge. It's for a team that's going to have probably some uncertainties this year, just with so many new faces. Having those 2 guys is kind of just your steadying force in special teams. I really think is going to be huge.
That's a good teaser, because the next quintet that'll be a part of the Warchant Top 40 when we do the next video. If you've read it already at warchant.com, because I repost these articles, then you already know he's there. But there is another specialist in the next group of 5, along with, I always like doing this, a safety, a defensive lineman, another safety, and a linebacker. So a little bit of a depth chart battle coming up in the next discussion on the Warchant Top 40. You can find the articles breaking down all of these, again, in groups of 5 on warchant.com. The website's pacing a little bit ahead of the video channel. We'll get that squared away and rectified this week.